Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ. My name is Douglas Parsons. Before we get to my amazing guest today, I want to give a shout out to Jay at the Fitness Geek Collective podcast. His podcast has been an excellent support of ours, and today they are going with video. So you can listen to them, you can see them as they put you through the paces looking at your physical and mental health. Look for them on Facebook and wherever you collect the best podcasts. Today's guest is brilliant. Now, I say that every week, and I mean it. So let's just add him to the pantheon of the fabulous guests that we've had so far. Emmet Michael is a musician from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He is out promoting his first single from an upcoming album. That single is God-Shaped Hole, and we're going to get a glimpse of that video here today. During this conversation with Emmet, we take a look at his upbringing. We're going to take a look at the role the church played in his life as a youth and the role the church plays in his life today. We're going to talk about his rehab from drugs and alcohol at the age of 17. We're going to come into today where he's found love and all along the way, how he has navigated this world as a transgender singer and songwriter. Again, one learns so much when we open ourselves up and we listen. So I hope you join me today as we listen, as we converse with a brilliant up-and-coming singer-songwriter. His name is Emmet Michael, and you are listening to Tales of the LGBTQ+.
God, don't make mistakes. It's no mistake that I was made. And you don't know what you don't know. All our hearts are God-shaped hole.
Hello, Emmet, and welcome to Tales of the LGBTQ+.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I am smitten always with a singer-songwriter, and I love being able to listen to his or her songs when they bare their souls. So I'm excited to be able to learn more about you today and be able to bring you to some of our listeners because with your first release, you've definitely bared your soul to everybody.
So yeah, I God Shaped Hole is the first single off of a full-length album that I'll be releasing in May, and I'm very, very excited about it. God Shaped Hole is definitely a more intimate look into my life. Um, I've been playing music for a while, but I didn't really feel comfortable talking about that aspect of my journey until quite recently, and I think that that's why it hasn't shown up in song. But now that's something that, as I'm working through it and healing and growing into who I am, have felt more comfortable sharing about, and that's been very, very cool for me.
Yeah, so for the uninitiated, uh, you're an up and coming singer songwriter. If you were to define your music, what would it be?
I think most commonly, and that's always hard, and I know it's hard for a lot of artists to answer that question because it's hard to categorize yourself based on how you think others might perceive you. And like I've been categorizing myself just as like a singer-songwriter as compared to like other genres because it's sort of an umbrella term for a lot of different things. And I most commonly like the art of music to me, where my passion lies, is in the lyrics and the songwriting. And the reason that has been such a focus of music for me is because I've used music as a platform to speak out about things and about my own personal emotions and experiences in a way that I never felt that I could using just words. And so that's why I feel very blessed to have the ability to do that through music, because otherwise I would be quite emotionally stifled. And I've used that to talk about my experience with mental illness and addiction. That's how I started to really make music. Like I grew up in the church, so I was always around it, and I loved to sing and write songs and play the guitar from a very young age. But I didn't really start to show people my original secular stuff until I stopped using drugs and I was in treatment, and I had all of these emotions that I didn't know what to do with. and I was living in this tiny bubble of like 6 or 7 other youth, and there was a guitar there, and I really leaned into that, and that was how I coped with stuff. And I wrote one of my first songs that saw the light of day there, that was all about my experience with addiction. And since then, I haven't really looked back. I've really leaned into that and been able to show aspects of who I am, from those topics to coming out as transgender in the church. That's a new thing that I've started to really write about and talk about openly. So yeah, it's really just like a reflection of my personal experience as a human being, and I think that creates grounds for connection to other people, and for people to really get that sense of like, I'm not alone in this. I've experienced this too, because I know, like for me, I get a lot out of listening to music that has a message that I can relate to, and to be able to provide that in some way is pretty cool for me.
Yeah. Let's delve into all of this.
Yes, let's.
Your new song, "God Shaped a Hole," is what got me to know who you are as an artist, and it seems to be bringing new set of eyes to your music. People are beginning to discover you. There's a lot to unpack in this song. On the micro and or macro level, what does your song "God Shaped Hole" mean?
Yeah. Yeah, so as mentioned before, like this has sort of been like a new venture for me, like talking openly about this, and something that COVID has like provided to me is the time to really sit back and reflect and get to know other people online. And for me, like I identify still as a Christian, and that was a really difficult journey for me. And obviously, like there's a lot of struggle around that, being somebody who is both queer, trans, and also religious. And I had to really change the way that I viewed religion in order to be able to get to that point again. Um, and like I had used drugs for a really, really long time to cope with that, and so I wasn't doing music for a very, very long time. And so basically, like what it came down to was "God Shaped Hole" was the first song that I ever wrote, and I actually wrote it a long time ago, and I just sat on it for a while. I wrote it 3 years ago, and I wrote it about my personal experience coming out as transgender in the church. And for the most part, like I was received quite well by a lot of my family in the church, but there was also, a greater group of people, and continues to be a greater group of people who identify with the church, that are not very affirming. And it was always important to me to regardless of that, to show those people love, with the hopes that would inspire them to see what unconditional love truly means. And that's really what the meaning of "God Shaped Hole" is for me.
Yeah. So you sat on this song for a couple years. Obviously, in the past year, we've been going through this COVID. We're living our life through Zoom or other social media bits. Why now? Why are you ready at this moment to release this song to the world?
Yeah, I think a lot of like the congruency for me is between my comfort as an individual and like my comfort in songs. So like as I feel more healed and prepared to tackle issues in my personal life, I feel more healed and prepared in sharing that with people. And I think whether it's music or whatever, that other people can relate to that. Like the more you work on yourself, the more you're able to then present yourself to the world. And that's really what it was for me.
By doing this, you're bearing your soul to people and in return, you get love, you may get criticism, but all along, you're living now your authentic self, and there's strength in being open. Living one's truth should never be difficult. And so you're definitely a trailblazer in this regard, because I know for myself, being a cis male, I've never thought about religion when it comes to someone being transgender before. But listening to your song and learning more about you, things start ruminating. I know there's also a part of me being kind of a dad type figure that I want to put bubble wrap around you and protect you from what's coming up, perhaps. But who are some of those trailblazers that you look up to, that you've been able to sit back and go, okay, if they can do that, I can do it?
I think I mean, like anyone like that, I've been inspired by a lot of people, and not just people who are like both out and a part of the church, but just like people in my everyday life. I can take their experience and the things that they've gone through and kind of apply that lens to my own life. And for me, like I've been inspired a lot by my mom. Is a really big one. She, went through a lot of difficult things, and I saw that in my childhood. And watching her overcome that has really inspired me. Something else that was very cool is that she of course was very devout Christian from the time that she was young, and I think when you're raised that way, it's really hard to see outside of that bubble. And when I came out, it initially, of course, was very difficult because it challenges a worldview that you've been taught for your entire life. And because she loved me, she took that on and did the research, and has since shifted her ideals around that and inspired others to do the same. And so that obviously, she can't relate to my experience, but that inspires me to be able to have the strength to advocate for myself, and to research things that I don't understand, and to be an advocate on behalf of other people as well, and to uplift other marginalized voices. So my mom is a very big one. I've also been inspired more recently this year, diving into like social media, lots of influential figures in the queer Christian circle. I've been doing a lot of reading, so I really appreciate a lot of authors who write openly about this type of stuff. One queer author that I really love that does a lot on social media is a non-binary person by the name of Kevin Garcia. And they wrote a book called Bad Theology Kills. And it's all about how theology and Christianity is damaging, and that for a long time in history we've looked at it through the wrong lens, and that it's important to look at theology through the lens of the oppressed, because those are voices that were not ever really heard or regarded very highly. And so I feel very inspired by them and their advocacy work. That's been really cool. And I mean, the list goes on. There's so many people that I found, especially this year online, that I've been inspired by that I didn't know existed before. And that inspires me to be strong in embracing who I am openly on social media as well. Because that's not something that's always come easily to me. I don't think it's something that comes easily to anyone. It takes a lot of practice. I'm still flexing that muscle. It's still hard sometimes, but watching other people do it and be so well received, it definitely helps.
Yeah. The one great thing about COVID is that it's allowed us time to go deeper and to search out things. Hopefully for the positive more than the negative, like a QAnon or something like that. But I know for myself, it's been the same. It's given me time to delve in deeper into voices like you just mentioned, and to learn and juxtapose how that goes with myself in the way that I want to live my life. I also like how you mentioned your mom, because that unconditional love is so important. And no matter how old we are, we always want that unconditional love, and the love of our moms are so important. When did you come out? When did you identify and speak out loud to the world?
Yeah, so I love this question because it's so complicated, because it was never like really like a one set time that I came out. And this is typical for people who are trans. They come out several times as like different things before they finally land on what it is they feel like they truly are. And like for me, I always knew from the time that I was a kid that like I just felt like a boy. It was never like, oh, I want to be one. It was just like, I feel like I am. And the hardest part of that was that given like being in a very sheltered upbringing, like I went to a Christian school from kindergarten to grade 9. I had like really no access to what was going on outside of that. And so I didn't have a very big introduction to the world of like LGBTQ people. I just knew that like there was same-sex attraction, and that was bad. And so for me, feeling those feelings and not having the language to describe that was really, really difficult. But from the time I could remember, I always wanted to dress in masculine presented clothing. and like hang out with the guys and do all of the typical like guy things. And it when you're a kid, it doesn't matter that much. Like people don't care that much, and they just kind of chalked it up to like, oh well, she's a tomboy. And I really like leaned into that label, and I took that on. And it wasn't until junior high that I was like, okay, there's more to this though. And I developed feelings for a girl that I was going to school with. And I was like, for a very, very long time, I actually denied that to myself, even. Uh, I didn't feel like if I admitted it to myself, I would then have to deal with it. And it took years for me to be able to get to that point. And it wasn't until a couple years later in high school, I went to a public high school and I didn't know anybody there. And I saw a trans person for the first time in my life knowingly. And it just like settled in like, oh my gosh, this is me. And I was both excited and like totally overwhelmed because it was like, well, now I have to deal with this. And I didn't for a long time, which is why I fell into addiction for many years. I couldn't get a job. I wasn't able to stay in school. I got expelled from and suspended from schools regularly because I was trying to cope with this thing that I wasn't ready to face. And in that time, I had come out as a lesbian, and I had started dating women. And I was so far removed from my life, though. Like I'd moved out of my mom's house and kind of was couch surfing from friends' places because I didn't want to deal with like what my family thought of that. And so we never actually really had conversations about like my sexual orientation or gender identity for a lot of my teen years. And it wasn't until I was arrested for possession that I was faced with the decision of you have something on your record or you go to treatment. And I was 17 years old, and I went to a treatment facility for youth. And it was there that my counselor encouraged me to try male pronouns and whatever name I wanted, because it was the safety bubble of like 6 or 7 other kids and all counselors. So it's like the optimal place to come out. And so I tried male pronouns, and I knew that there's no way I could go back into the outside world and go back from that. And like for a very long time, I obviously like felt the feelings that I had felt, and I just now was really starting to talk about that openly and felt the safety to do so. So I was very scared, but it was nice to have that space, and everyone there was really great, like including the other kids. Like they didn't necessarily understand, but that didn't matter, and I really appreciated that. And so I lived there for 3 months, and so to go back from living there for 3 months the way that I was back into the real world, I knew that this identity that I had finally called my own had to come out into the world with me, because this is who I was. And I came out to my family over the phone and then in a family counseling session. And it was really, really hard. And it was hard for a couple of years after that. But as I said, like they were able to do the research necessary to be able to get to a point of not just like acceptance, but being able to advocate for me. And they even took like that stuff into the church that they were going to at the time, and we're like, let's have this conversation. I think it really differs when people are suddenly viewing this as not an issue, but as a human being. And that's for sure what the case was for my family, and why they felt inspired to then take it into the church and to their social circles. So that was sort of like my, I guess, official coming out. But I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, you come out several times throughout your life, but that was like the big moment, I guess.
That's amazing to hear, and it's wonderful that we have people like that person out there that saves lives, more or less. During this time that you're struggling and you're coming out in so many different ways, uh, you grew up in this religious home. What type of conversations were you having with God during this time?
That's a great question. I don't get asked that very often. I either so in my teen years, I just sort of shut that down. And I found myself, so going back, I always felt very close to God. I led worship at the school that I was going to and at the youth group that I went to. And that was always sort of like, and still is, like, music is my main connection to a higher power. That's when I feel the most spiritually connected. And when I feel like I hear God's voice. And so in that period before really like facing my identity, I felt like I was still connected. And when I reached junior high and started to have feelings for a girl, um, that is when I started to sort of challenge that. And it wasn't really like I was angry. And, everybody copes with this and has different experiences around this. But for me, it was like a devastation and feeling abandoned by a God that I, for so long, had really felt loved by. And that was a difficult transition for me, obviously. And I think I had a lot of conversations in my teen years with God that basically went like, please take these feelings away from me. I don't want them. And if they're going to stay, then don't let me wake up tomorrow. And that was like a regular, and like the crying myself to sleep, and like, really like quote unquote trying to pray it away. um, and then feeling frustrated that I would wake up and those feelings were still there. And so I felt very rejected by God and by the church. And going into high school, because that was so painful, I decided that that was not even a conversation I wanted to have altogether. And I walked away from church and away from my relationship to a higher power. And the only time that I found myself really talking to God was if I had done too many drugs and I felt like I was on the brink of death, and I was, like desperately begging for me to be okay, or things like that. Like if I was in an extreme emotional drug-induced state, then that was pretty much the only time that I ever felt the need to reach out to God and to pray. And like after I went to treatment and had that space of being sober for a while, that was something I started to readdress. But I knew that I would have to shift what I felt like Christianity was from the time that I was a kid until now. And that has obviously changed a lot. And something that I've had to keep in mind is like this idea of, if it is not loving and it doesn't do good things, then it isn't from God. And that's something that I've had to like repeatedly sort of tell myself, because I do believe that God is love and that he created people with intent and purpose exactly the way that they are on purpose. And so I could tell myself that for a really long time, but it took me a long time to be able to believe that. And that was in being open again to pray and to really listen and hear, and music was a huge part of that too, working through it that way. And I decided to go to church again a couple of years ago for the first time in a long time. And I sort of had the attitude of like, I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm queer or trans. If people find out, then that's cool. I'll have that conversation, but it's not necessarily something that I felt the need to tell everyone. And it was there that I started to feel like I could start to have conversations with God again. And I started leading worship at that church, actually. And that was how I started to be reconnected.
So, with what you were saying, then, this need and desire for God's love during this time, I can see that feeding into your addiction, because if your time to be able to connect with God was when you were high or under an influence, it would definitely bring on further addiction to these substances, I would imagine.
Yeah, totally. I drank and used drugs a lot, in part because when I was in my younger teen years, I was so used to pushing my emotions down that I didn't feel them. And I got to the point where like I would want to cry, but I couldn't. And I just felt like a lot of anger. But when I got like completely obliterated, all of those emotions would come up, and it was like a release in a way. And so, like it was both that and then feeling, it wasn't necessarily like I felt a connection to God. It was just like desperation in that moment to reach out to something and to not feel alone, because I felt so alone in those moments, even in periods where I was, you know, at parties with several other people. um, I didn't feel really truly connected to anyone because I wasn't being honest about who I was, even to myself, let alone anybody else. So that added a whole other dimension to it, and that's very common of people who use drugs, is that sense of like loneliness and not feeling connected to others. You hear a lot in recovery communities that addiction is the opposite of connection, and that's for sure been the case in my life. I leaned also on drugs and alcohol because it was like in a way like a social lubricant. I felt like I could talk to people where I may not otherwise. I always struggled from a young age with anxiety and depression, and so talking to people and getting to know people was really difficult for me. But if I had um, drugs on me, then automatically that made me the cool guy at the party. And so that was like another reason I got so used to being that guy rather than being um, a human being, just myself, you know?
What was it like the first time you heard the proper pronouns used, directed towards you when you were inside the church?
Oh man, I think I don't really remember that moment. It was sort of a weird transition. So when I got out of rehab, I actually went to the church that I was going to before for a while, and um, nobody really talked to me at that church, and I sort of purposely isolated myself from people. I had sort of relationships to people my own age there prior to like my addiction and leaving the church for a couple of years, but when I went back, obviously having been gone for a couple of years affected those relationships. I also think because obviously like my outward appearance had changed a lot, and I think that people just sort of had a hard time dealing with that. And I don't necessarily blame them for that. I think that's a hard conversation to approach, even if you do care about having that conversation. And to this day, I will not know for a fact what their opinion of me was. So I don't want to make an assumption of what it was just because they didn't talk to me, because I also didn't initiate conversations with those people either. And I'm sure that they just figured it was a sensitive subject and that it was too difficult, which I get to a degree. And so when I went back to that church, there was church leadership there, and other like adults who were friends with my mom who had started to use like the right pronouns, and that was really cool, especially coming from people who had not been introduced to transgender people before that they knew of. And yeah, it felt really good. It also felt um, a little bit awkward in the sense that I felt like I was causing a burden to these people for making them have to shift their worldviews, or having, because they had to consider my pronouns, and maybe that was hard for them. And now like I realize that that's pretty silly, and it's pretty easy to like address somebody by the correct pronouns. And if anybody's super upset about using those pronouns, it's like, why do you care so much about such a small thing that is such a big thing to somebody else's identity? Like at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with you, and it's quite easy to do. But I feel like a lot of my life I was obsessed with this like idea of not wanting to hurt or burden other people. And so I very often would put other people in the center of what I was going through rather than like me, who was suffering the most. So yeah, it was a weird mix of being like excited to embark on this new journey, but also like hyper aware of what people thought at all times, and that took a really long time for me to get over.
So let's talk about this music video. There are many images of people who are holding placards, signs that talk about religion, whether it's from the Bible itself or their own personal thought. Where did these images, as well as these people, come from?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, this year I decided to lean into social media a little bit more, and it was really important to me to take this time to connect with people all around the world. and people who I could relate to and who had similar journeys to mine. And so I put out an ask on my Instagram, just saying like, anybody who identifies as queer is welcome to participate in this music video. And basically, several people that I had talked to before or hadn't talked to before messaged me, and they asked if they could participate in the video. And literally my instruction was just like, take a 10-second long video clip of yourself holding a sign, writing either something that has to do with your queer identity, and I sent them the song, and so it was like in relation to the message of this song. It could be like a positive message that you took from religion, or it could be a negative one, because I didn't want to I wanted to allow space for them to tell their story from their own perspective, because I think that any perspective is valid, whether you are a queer person who has never been a part of the church but who has been impacted by people in the church, whether you are a person who has left faith and come back, or decided to never come back, because that's super valid too. Like, there are a lot of people who are so hurt by religion that they choose to leave it behind altogether and to move on with their lives, and I think that makes perfect sense to me. And I wanted to depict all of those lenses in the video rather than just like the same story as mine, because that's not what it was about. So yeah, that was really, really cool for me to be able to have everyone sort of share their own experience from their own lens.
Who directed? Where was this shot?
Yeah, so I was like, I want to find like a really beautiful church to do this in, because I thought that it'd be really cool to be able to be in a space like that, talking about these things and how the church has affected me personally and other people as well. So obviously, people with their video clips, they could film it wherever they wanted, in their bedroom, outside, whatever. It was COVID, so there was not a lot of other options otherwise. But yeah, I asked around in Edmonton. I was looking for a church that was both affirming and that was aesthetically beautiful. And for me, like, I'm big on stained glass windows, and they provided really, really cool lighting too. And so I rented out that space, and it was just myself and my friend, who has really just started the journey of videography. And that's been really cool, because I haven't made a lot of music videos, obviously, and neither has she. And it's cool to like collaborate and figure that out. Like, I understand the importance of like very well produced things and all of that, but when you're on a tight budget, there's only so much you could do. And I really wanted to do something that was like simple but spoke volumes, and I felt like being in a building like that in and of itself sort of it did that.
So let's play your music video right now.
Here on the Tales of the LGBTQ+, this is my music video, God-Shaped Hole.
So long, farewell, goodbye. I've got wars still left to fight. Tooth and nail, eye for an eye. Flows revenge, you've got it right. And there's been far too little grace from people claiming to be saved. All God's children spewing hate, digging graves and saving face. I used to always pray I wouldn't wait the next day. Still feeling like my body's left my soul betrayed. God, don't make mistakes. It's no mistake that I was made. And you don't know what you don't know. All our hearts are God-shaped hole. I'm so far from perfect, still don't admit my own defeat. And my doubts, my greatest defect, all my fear is crippling. I wish I wasn't always quiet when I needed to speak up. I wish my words were always gentle when I spoke about love. Shame still hums aloud like a ghost underground. Why am I most lonely when I'm standing in a crowd of people of the faith? I hope someday that could change, 'cause you don't know what you don't know. All our hearts are God-shaped hole. Tell me, how'd you make it look so easy? Kick me while I'm down on my knees, praying for the strength to love you like he loves me. And tell me, oh, how'd you make it look so easy? Kick me while I'm down on my knees, praying for the strength to love you like he loves me.
God-Shaped Hole speaks of what unconditional love really is, and it brings in the conflict between a fundamentalist Christian background and your identity as a transgender male. Do you believe it is possible for religion to play an active part of the lives of people within the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, I do think it's possible. I think as people who identify as Christians, your most important job is to love people. And I think part of that is, asking critical questions and like evaluating, like, if something in the Bible is causing people harm to the extent that an entire community is like struggling really bad with substance use, and suicides are happening regularly for queer people who are in church spaces, like, to me, it is then your job to ask why, and to not point your finger at the people who are suffering. And um, for me, like, I look at what Jesus preached while on earth, and who he hung out with. And he hung out with the people who were outcasted in society. And that's why I think it's so funny and so ironic and hypocritical that there are all of these people on religious pedestals who are some of the wealthiest people in the world and the whitest people in the world and the straightest. And it's like, that's not God's doing. And it's important that we dismantle these systems of privilege, because that is what it comes down to, and really evaluate like how that happened, and to continue to allow people to suffer. I feel whether you read it in the Bible or not and interpret it that way, it's not loving. And I think it's more important to listen to the Holy Spirit, and to ask in your own relationship what is right, rather than to look back on a historical book that we can't ever really evaluate to be true. I really feel like the most important thing is to love. And the cool thing is that I've seen a lot of people who are not queer in the church bring up in their churches, like, hey, what is your stance on LGBTQ issues? And they've really like opened the door to have those conversations with their churches. And if those churches aren't willing to have that conversation, then they've left. And more and more churches are starting to be like, whoa, why is everyone leaving? And I think that's great, because that is a question that they should be asking. And I'm really anxious to see which way we go from there, because there are a couple different perspectives. Like, a lot of people are pointing their fingers at the people who are leaving and saying, well, they're not leaning into their faith enough, or they're not praying enough, or really looking at what the Bible says. And I think it's just the opposite. I think that these are people who care a lot about loving God and about loving others, and that's precisely why that they've left. And it's important for people to understand that God and religion are not the same thing at all. I don't think that Christianity has a monopoly on God. And I think that, other religions and spiritual forms are all just versions of sort of the same thing. And however you connect, that's cool. Like, that's the part that matters. That's my personal take on that, though.
Yeah. What did your mom think when you first played the song to her?
So I actually, the first time that I played that song was at a live performance. And I think it was actually at a church where I was doing, like, it was sort of like a house concert sort of vibe, and I was opening for another act. And I had that song tentatively on the set list. It was like newly written, and so I had both the fear of like, this is a song I haven't practiced a lot, but also like, this is a song that I'm going to play to a lot of people who go to this church and who don't really know me, and my mom was there, and so that was obviously scary too. And not because I was worried about like her judging me, but just because, you want her to be proud. And I was just really worried. But I just felt moved to play the song. It was the last song that I played, and I said in front of all of these strangers, like, this is the story of this song. Here goes. And I played it, and my mom was very emotional. And I think, like, that actually just reminds me of another show that I played, and my sister was sitting right at the front, and she's typically not a very emotional person, and so I haven't seen her cry a lot. And I was telling the story of this song, and I looked at her, and she was just like in tears. And I think more commonly, like, we haven't really actually talked a lot about the song, but I see that emotional response, and I see that that's something that impacts not just me, but my family, because they want me to be loved and accepted just as much as I do, right? And so I think there's a fear when I know that my mom has expressed to me, like, there is a fear that she has that I am being so open, and she's proud of me for doing so. But as my mom, she worries about the kind of backlash that I will receive as a result of deciding to be that open. And I've just had to say, like, I'm aware of that going into these situations, that can happen. And sometimes I do get not very nice messages from people, but it's worth all of the positive messages that I get in return. And she understands that. I think it's just hard as a mom to know that your kid is opening the door to possibly be hurt.
Yeah. It's birthday and Christmas gifts for the rest of your life of bubble wrap. It's going to be that way
Perfect.
for a while.
Yeah.
We've mentioned your mom, we mentioned your sister briefly, but we should also mention a brother of yours who contributes artwork to your albums.
Yes.
Is that going to be something that continues on for your career, or was this just a short term just with one of your past records?
So my brother did the artwork for God Shaped Hole. He also did all of the artwork for an EP that I released a couple years ago. And when you were asking about who inspired me, he's for sure on that list as well. He's younger than me. He's 4 years younger than me, and we've been close from the time that we were little. Like, we spent like every day together, and we were always in our imaginations and writing stories and making movies. And he's also very artistic, and in a multitude of ways compared to myself. So he, first and foremost, is an incredible visual artist, obviously. But he's also an actor and has done theater for many years, and is now starting to dabble in music as well. And I've just watched him really excel at those things, and that's been cool. And he's always really excited to participate in any type of project that I give him. And I think it's really neat what he brings to the table, because I'm not providing any necessarily like an idea of what it should be. I'm just saying, listen to the song and basically write whatever your heart, or draw whatever your heart is telling you to. And he's done an incredible job of being able to illustrate a picture of what I feel the song represents. He's very intuitive, and so I can really trust his creative lens that way. And I think that going forward, like, I will definitely utilize that. And I think it's cool, like, to be able to collaborate with somebody that you grew up with and that has experienced some of the same things as you, and to be able to come together to make something. It's very cool.
You're going to release a new album, and you mentioned a release of an EP that you did a couple of years ago. Where can we find this music?
Yeah, so my music is on all of the streaming platforms as it stands, and my new album will be as well. So that's your Spotify, iTunes, all the other ones. It's all there. So
And when do you expect the new album to come out?
May 28th, we finally set a date. So very excited about that. Yeah.
Excellent. Hopefully, you'll be able to do live shows around that time. Maybe not immediately, but hopefully, there'll be some type of festival season.
Yes, I'm really hoping so. I would really like to do a tour of at least Western Canada. To be able to get out of the city for a little bit would be really, really cool. If not, though, I'll continue to be doing lots of live stream shows as I have been. That's been pretty cool. You can, interact with people in the comment section, and I can be in the comfort of my own home, and that's kind of nice. But there's definitely nothing like being with people and connecting with them face to face. I cannot wait until I can do that again.
Or throwing out the idea, you can always go back to your early days of busking if you need to, or if you want to.
I've considered it.
You started busking at an early age. What age was that?
Oh man. I started to, like, here and there busk when I was like 14, 15. I was never really afraid of like performing for people. I started to like really busk a lot when I was a teenager, and I was like trying to scrounge up enough money for like food or a bottle or something. Um, and then later it was really like my first hand in like being employed in a way. Like, I started to make enough money that I didn't really need a job when I was going back to high school after rehab and was trying to graduate, which was something I never thought that I'd be able to do. I busked like pretty much every other day after school for a couple of years. And it was something that I absolutely loved to do, obviously not just for the money, but I met a lot of people that way. It's really cool. It's like a lot of people would like leave notes in my guitar case, like just being like, "You're awesome," things like that. And that's an experience that I'll never forget. And like people like congregating to like dance or listen for a while. And yeah, it's just pretty cool to be like, "Hey, here I am. Like, you can share this space with me," and to a bunch of strangers. And yeah, it's very neat.
I've noticed also when looking back at your lyrics from your last album that you're a strong storyteller within those songs, and they're very descriptive. One of your songs, titled Locksmith Hands, stood out to me especially, and I'm just going to read some of the lyrics out loud. Here, let me bring it up. Try your luck. A guilty man pleads innocent, and she still got a grudge. A penny in a wishing well won't buy you real love. Padlock heart, locksmith hands and ambiance for wishing on the stars. I think that we could teach each other who we really are. To me, that's just beautiful.
Thank you.
How do we begin to teach each other who we really are?
I think the first thing that sticks out to me is, in order to really learn about somebody else and to really connect with somebody else, we have to be willing to be vulnerable enough that we could get hurt, but the risk far outweighs the reward. And that's sort of what that whole song is about. I was in this period where I had just ended a 5-year relationship with somebody that I had spent a lot of like my more difficult years with. And so it was really hard because it was somebody that I had leaned on for a long time. And I felt really betrayed and really hurt in that time. And I think it's easy for us in those times to close ourselves off to the idea of ever being open again. And that's sort of the space that I was in at that time. And then I met my now fiance a little over 3 years ago, and it was like I didn't have a choice. And like she is the depiction of what locksmith hands are. And the reason I called it that is because there are people that we meet in our lives that don't give us the choice. They just make us feel so safe and comfortable and love us so well that they open up the padlocks of our hearts and allow us to let down our walls in a way that we haven't been able to before. And that was a really cool transition for me to go from like that fear to meeting somebody that was like, hey, I've got you, and just deciding to dive into that. Knowing full well that I could get hurt. And the more you invest in somebody and the more you connect to somebody, the more likely it is that it will hurt more. But I feel like, you know, that's a part of life, and that even if that happens, we'll learn from that situation, and we'll still take parts out of every relationship that we have. And I'm lucky enough, you know, that it's worked out, and I found somebody that continues to allow me to be open and vulnerable and receives me as I am.
Yeah. And has seen you through this burgeoning self where where you're now comfortable putting yourself out there and releasing the first single from your new album. That's fantastic. I do have a question for you. Because you're blooming and that you're coming out again, but you're blossoming, why a moth and not a butterfly?
Yeah, so I do get asked that a lot, and I think traditionally butterflies are a lot more like beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, and I think it's important for people to realize like the transformation isn't about coming out into this perfect, beautiful, shiny new thing, but rather, you know, spreading your wings and flying. And even if it's not the most beautiful thing or the most colorful, that's still okay. And that transformation, I think society really paints this picture of like, you're bad, and you struggle, and then you heal and you're good. And that's not really the case. And the other cool thing about moths for me is that they are drawn to light. And that's for me as a person, like I always want to be drawn to like what is, to me, light represents like good and love and all of those positive messages, and to always be pursuing that to me was really important. But yeah, I love that moths aren't necessarily perfect, but that doesn't take away from the transformation.
And I should probably back up here and explain why I brought up this question of a moth as well. I believe you use it as part of your logo or your um, advertising, but it's also a tattoo on you as well.
It is, yes. Yeah, I've got it. Just a little peek there on my chest. That was actually a very cool story. So I had top surgery a few years ago, and it didn't go the way that I planned. Long story short, the nipple tissue did not survive, and my nipples quite literally fell off of my body. And so there were big like holes where they used to be, and it was just like a massive scar tissue. And so I went, you know, it's really disheartening when you've waited your whole life to be able to like take your shirt off in public, and you feel like your body is still not what you feel that it was meant to be, and you don't feel like you can present that part of yourself to the world. And so I didn't really get to feel that freedom for a couple of years after my surgery. And I had planned to get a tattoo to cover it up. I was faced with the decision of either get a revision and maybe it would look better, or just get some artwork. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get the artwork done. And I reached out to a tattoo artist that was somebody I had not seen before, and we had 2 sessions each for 3 hours, which is excruciating, but obviously well worth it. And you know, I told her my story and about like what had happened with the surgery and all of that. And the second session, when the tattoo was finished and I went to pay, she was like, "So I talked to my husband last night, and we want to give this to you for free as our gift to you for all of the things that you've been through." And that was like over $500 worth of tattooing. And we just hugged and cried. And this is somebody that I had not met before. Like, it was her first tattoo that she had done. It won't be her last tattoo that she does for me, that's for sure. So that was just like a very beautiful, full circle kind of moment, especially for a tattoo that had so much meaning to me.
Oh, that's just fantastic. That's brilliant. There's a lot of good people in the world.
Absolutely. And I noticed that overwhelmingly so. Like, I've, of course, have been on the end of dealing with people being not so nice, but way more often than not, people are kind, even if they don't necessarily understand. They want to, and they'll listen, and that people generally are pretty good at loving each other.
Yeah. What would the Emmett of today say to that young busker or that young Emmett who was going through the throes of addiction and possession? What would you say to that younger self?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's obviously a list of things. If I had to choose one or two, I think it would be, um, you are loved and accepted as you are. And if you embrace who you are and are open about it, you will then create an opportunity for to let people love you. Because for a long time, I think there were those opportunities, but I denied myself that because I didn't have faith that I was worthy of love. And so I think that's a huge message, is that, you know, you are worthy as you are, and not just, like, if you fix yourself and do all of the healing. Like, no matter where you're at in your life, you are worthy of love and acceptance and of people meeting you where you're at.
Yeah. I know that there's going to be a lot of people who will listen to our podcast and fall in love with you and wish you the best. What would be the best way that we can support you as a supporter of your music and as an ally? What can we do?
Sure. Yeah. I always say, so my most favorite way to stay connected to my community, my fans, is to sign up to my email list on my website, which is just emmetmichaelmusic.com. And that is a platform that I use to share aspects of my personal journey that I don't on other social platforms. I actually love to just email back and forth with people too that way, because I view that as like a two-way street. Like, it's not just about people supporting me. Like, I want there to be a genuine connection between myself and that and my community. And so, yeah, to sign up to my email list is a really big one for me. Obviously, streaming my music is really great. You don't make a lot of money from that, unfortunately, and unfortunately, you need to make money to be able to continue to do music. And so the best way to support me that way is to show up to my shows. I do virtual shows regularly. And I also have merchandise on my website as well. I really care about sustainable fashion. And so I started thrifting t-shirts and embroidering them. And right now I'm doing a design that says "Love Unconditionally" with an embroidered rainbow on it. And you can order any size or color of t-shirt and have your own very specially, uniquely made piece. And they all come with some extra special gifts as well. So there's some really good merchandise on my website too.
That's fantastic. And I'll make sure that we put those websites and those other platforms here with this YouTube video as well. It sounds to me that you're in a good place, and I'm really excited for you. What's what is the next step? What do you foresee your future as being?
Yeah, I foresee my future as being a lot more growth and getting better at my crafts, getting better at connecting to other people, connecting with more people. And I think that the release of this album is really going to help me to be able to do those things. I'm going to be sharing more aspects of my story through that music that maybe I haven't before. And my hope is that people will resonate with that. And hopefully I'll be able to tour and get to meet some of the really great folks that I've met online, and to be able to share those songs face to face with people. But yeah, that the big thing for me is just to like move forward and become a better person, a better advocate, a better ally, and a better friend to a multitude of people.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us here today on Tales of the LGBTQ+. I've been thrilled to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, of course, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, on behalf of Emmet, I'm Douglas Parsons. I want to thank you for spending the time with us here today on Tales of the LGBTQ+. Always remember to be good, be safe, and please remember to text when you get home. Until next time.
God, don't make mistakes. It's no mistake that I was made. And you don't know what you don't know. All our hearts are God-shaped hole.